All right, it's 2 o'clock Thursday. It is time for our weekly discussion, our recorded tomorrow podcast, conversation, whatever you want to call it. My name is Jason Swanson. I am thrilled to be your host. I'm going to be here for the duration. Ani is on vacation today, and I hope as far away from a laptop as possible. So it's my pleasure to be joined today by two friends, colleagues, thought partners, Tyree Allie and James Brown. So as we jump in to the thick of things, I have to apologize a little bit. I'm getting used to running this platform, so there might be a couple of hiccups, but I hope you'll bear with us. So a couple of comfort notes for everyone. This session is indeed being recorded. So if you happen to miss a piece of it or would like to share it, it will be housed on YouTube. You can use Twitter and Facebook to comment and ask questions, and we'll do our best to answer those questions as time allows. And for those of you that are curious about Remake Learning and their norms and values, you can feel free to visit remakelearning.org/join to review the network norms and values. So this conversation is being brought to you by the Tomorrow campaign. It is powered by Remake Learning and also created in deep consultation with my organization, KnowledgeWorks. So KnowledgeWorks is a national nonprofit, and one of the things that makes our organization unique is that since 2006, we've been rigorously exploring the future of learning, and we've been tremendously excited and honored to partner with Remake Learning to curate these conversations as part of the Tomorrow campaign. So for those of you not familiar with Remake Learning is a network that ignites engaging, relevant, and equitable learning practices in support of young people navigating rapid social and technological change. We've been thinking about the future quite a bit with both KnowledgeWorks and Remake Learning. And what you see here are the three pillars, what we would consider the network's aspirational future. So we are all working hard to create a future of learning for which justice, methods, and relationships are key priorities and indeed key pillars for which to bring our visions for the future of learning in our community to fruition. And lastly, the Tomorrow campaign is really a campaign that seeks to ask big questions about the future of learning. Among those questions, we're asking, what might tomorrow bring? What will young people need to know so that they flourish in a future of unknown possibilities? How can we prepare children and youth for what's next while staying grounded in timeless needs? And what can we do today to make tomorrow a more promising place for all learners? So tomorrow is really a call to action to imagine both aspirational and bold futures for learning, and to set a course to making those futures a reality. You can learn more about the Tomorrow campaign at remakelearning.org/tomorrow. So, as I mentioned, I am tremendously honored to be joined by Tyree Allie and James Brown. And gentlemen, would you mind introducing yourselves and telling us a little bit about what you do and a bit about the Lighthouse?
Well, I'm James Brown. It's good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be here. I'm the Director of Youth Development for the Homewood-Brushton YMCA, which includes our Y Creator Space, which is our middle school maker space, and the YMCA Lighthouse Project, which is our high school media and arts program, where our mission is to help young people be creative, be connected, and to be, future ready, if you will, for career, college, and life. And we do that through providing young people an opportunity to think and act, to use their voice, and to be digitally savvy and literate in terms of being content creators of media in arts, performing arts, media arts, creative writing, music production, graphic design, leveraging those crafts so that young people have a voice in their community and have an outlet for expression. And I'll let Tyree introduce himself because he's one of our esteemed alumni who's still very much involved in a variety of capacities with the Lighthouse. And so I'm thankful that he's joining me in this conversation.
Hi, my name's Tyree Allie. It's okay. You get used to the mispronunciation after 20 years. Yeah, my name's Tyree Allie. I'm a Lighthouse alum. I'm a rapper and a couple other things, but I'm bad at giving myself props. So yeah.
Well, welcome and thank you both for joining us, and thank you for the correction on your last name. My apologies.
It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. It happens all the time.
Well, that's no excuse. So now I know I'll do better. So one of the things you didn't list, in addition to being, a talented rapper, sound engineer, is that from my point of view, you have all of the makings for just being a fantastic futurist. And that I had the pleasure of collaborating with both of you around a project where we worked with young people to think about the future and create a podcast series about the future of learning. And within that spirit too, the Lighthouse I know has programming around Afrofutures and kind of melding that gaming. So I figured we'd start talking about the future, kind of like the wide open future, right? And both of your experiences sort of in that field and in that terrain. So one of the questions that I'm curious to know is that, given your experience in thinking about the future and thinking about how to tell those stories, and kind of where we're at right now as a society and a country, right? We're in, at best, maybe a transformational period, at worst, like a highly disruptive period. But like, when it comes to thinking about the future, why is it so hard to think about sort of these transformational visions of the future?
It's an interesting question. I think from the vantage point of, what we aspire to be as artists and activists and creators, I don't know if it's that hard to imagine. I think we know what we do imagine. And I think we know what we want to some degree, because I think that's the work of, you can't be an activist without having sort of an imagination for what's possible. That's what inspires you to act. And I think artists similarly, create by trying to create, feelings, emotions in a world that, they aspire, they're trying to bring some sort of sense of their ideas for what the world should sound like, look like, feel like when they create art. And so I think, I guess if I'm saying anything, it's really making a case for, what makes music and art and, Afrofuturist thinking and Afrofuturist writing, what makes it so important is because it's providing that sort of at least one blueprint or, a variety of blueprints for what the future could and should be.
I really appreciate that, right? So it's almost, to me, if I'm reading this right, it's in describing those alternative or preferred futures, right? You have to believe that it's possible. Then I think underneath of that, right, is there's a level of optimism that you can reach at least some level of that future you've described.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think to sort of answer your initial question, what the challenge is I think that increasingly, I think, folks feel like, there's so much polarization and individualization in our world, so much individual action and that sort of thing that I think it's, change generally happens through collective action. And so I think that's what makes it difficult for people to think about transformative changes, because, you know, society has been fragmented for a variety of reasons, you know, in the ways that we consume and act and come together. There's a lot of fragmentation, and I think that's the challenge, right? And that's what we're always trying to overcome. And we're seeing, you know, in this moment, different ways that folks are coming together. I think in some ways people are being inspired. Parts of society and parts of this country have sort of awoken to challenges and are feeling called to act in ways that they've maybe never acted before. And so there's both, you know, I think always in sort of these moments, there's both, you know, the concern and the challenge that we know exists, but also that's where the optimism comes from, because you see people acting in ways they've never acted before, or being open to ideas that they've never been open to before.
So yeah, I maybe a better way to phrase that question too is transformational for whom, right? And I think a lot of times when sort of that imagination deficit is brought into the equation, it's usually an imagination deficit for the winners in the current system to imagine anything different, right? And, you know, it just kind of galvanizes you. Tyree, I'm interested in sort of your take on this, because, you know, I was honored to watch you craft some really deeply nuanced scenarios about the future that, you know, were fairly novel for one, right? So they were definitely in that transformative space. And you did a really thoughtful job of balancing both positive and negative, right? They weren't overly optimistic, and the future was not a dumpster fire.
Could you say the question again?
Yeah, just getting your thoughts on thinking about the future, right? And that kind of what led to your approach and kind of crafting sort of the images that you did, because they were really highly nuanced, right? They weren't overly painting a overly rosy picture of the future. They were transformative, so you didn't extend the present out, nor were they like overly negative, right? They weren't, you didn't read it and go, oh, I want to avoid this. You went, this is really, really different and compelling. So, you know, what was your thought process in coming into that?
Well, it's just me as a person. I'm very muted, I guess. I'm not too much of one of the other. Like I'm hardly ever like super optimistic or like super pessimistic. I'm always just kind of in the middle most of the time. So that's just kind of how I approached it, just because that's me. I'm not the happiest person in like the world, but I'm not like, but like my life's not falling apart. So I just took that approach. And that's kind of how it turned out. Because I feel like a lot of like books or movies lean into one or the other, and it's like it's cool, like it's fine, but it's I can't really think of any that others like, you know what, this future's okay. Like this future's okay. Like it's not the most fantastic thing ever. It's not the most terrifying thing ever. But I'd be okay living this. That's how I felt. So that's what it turned into.
I think that's important to remember, right? Is that, you know, a lot of times when we're talking about the future of anything, there are elements that are going to be mundane, right? Just like in our current lives, right? There's going to be some stuff that's just okay. There'll be some stuff to be excited about, and some stuff that you're like, man, I would just rather not do that today. Which, go ahead.
I didn't want to lean too much into like a fantasy, you know?
Absolutely.
Like fully automated everything, and I don't have to lift a finger, or I don't want to lean in too far into one or the other, because that's not real. It's just not real to me. Like I mean, I say this now, but who knows how it'll be in a couple hundred years. But I just think when it comes to actively thinking about the future, you have to be a little bit of a realist, and you can't just jump all the way in to like, we're going to be able to travel to every other planet on one ship. And like, I don't think that's realistic, for now, it's not realistic, but that's just how I approached it.
Yeah, for sure.
I think, you know, and Tyree is much more of a science fiction head than I am. But I think when we draw our cues from sort of science fiction and dystopian, what's always interesting, and I think there's some sense of realism here, although it's always over accentuated, is the idea that in some sort of science fiction futures, there's sort of some highly technological society. And you sort of imagine the benefits, and you see the benefits in those types of narratives of what it means to be highly technological. And usually it's juxtaposed with some deep, hugely problematic social problem or human problem, right? And that's always often the tension in the story. And I don't think we're far off. You know, if we're going to imagine futures, I don't think that that's wrong. It's certainly maybe, you know, it's obviously exaggerated, but I don't think it's far off from what we have to be thinking about in terms of the real future.
Yeah, it's like the seeds are there, right? You can see where this is going. And it's interesting too, is like when we start to look at sci-fi, video games, anime, right? Is like those kind of future archetypes, like the technological utopia, which isn't a utopia, the society that got it right in terms of living in harmony with nature, the dystopian society, right? Everything. And then there's kind of like the continuation, right? If we just kept going, where are we going to be? But yeah, the continuation scenario for us looks like that tech scenario now. So one of the questions I was also really curious to ask you both, because it came up as a through line as we worked together on the podcast, and that was, by and large, amongst all of the youth, there was a feeling that where we're at right now in this point in time, where classes have had to go all virtual, that this was a scenario for the future of learning to be avoided, sort of that technological race to the bottom, where we're devoid of sort of human contact, and school has become like a really highly transactional, like technologically mediated experience. So bringing that back to 2020, you know, we've all gone through and are experiencing this massive experiment in virtual learning. Like, where do you both see sort of the promises and pitfalls of that mode of learning? And when we're into that post-COVID future, like, what do you hope sticks around and what do you hope just drops by the wayside?
I'm out of school, but personally, I learn best like hands-on, like actual, like in interaction. So doing everything online isn't the best for a student like me. Because like I will be 100% honest, I will get distracted and I will walk away, like, and I'll start doing something else. And also, just being taught at home isn't optimal for certain people. Like so my grandmother has dementia, right? And I take care of her all day, every day. So if I'm at home while I'm trying to do my classwork, and my grandmother, who doesn't quite understand what I'm doing and won't remember what I'm doing, could just walk in at any moment and ask me to go do something that could take X amount of minutes. So and then there's much worse circumstances that people could be in. I would rather not, but you like, learning from home isn't good for certain people, because one, that's just not good for them learning. The situation could not be the funnest for them. And then for some people, it's perfect. People who just tell me what I got to do it, turn it in, go about like their business. Because like, I've gone to school with like people, for instance, like my girlfriend is like one of those tell me what I got to do and I will get it done person. That is who she is. So this probably doesn't slow her down much. But if it was me, I'd be having problems, because that's my situation and my circumstances. So it's different for everyone depending on what their circumstances, plus on how they learn best. And some people just don't like it. So
yeah, there are some people that just could just straight up not like it too, not to mention the barriers to learning. Yeah, I don't know if I would have been able to do it. We work in that territory, but you know, part of the education experience for me is meeting different people and seeing friends and kind of everything that wraps around going to a physical environment.
I feel like people forget about the social aspect of what school is. Like early education is about teaching you, but it's also about socializing children to work, to be around each other. Because like I grew up in a house where I always had cousins around, so I was always with someone or playing with someone or arguing or fighting or whatever, right? But what about the guy who's like only been with his parents, never really talked to anyone else like his age? Because like the majority of time when I wasn't in school, I was with my grandparents. So as a lot of my friends, I have a lot of old man tendencies. Just on like how I operate, how I handle situations, and like others. JB's laughing because he knows exactly what I mean. He's seen it. But what people need to understand what the social part of school is, because regardless of what tier of school you're in, there needs to be some form of social like interaction. Because like people are gonna develop their own feelings on things regardless of who they meet and how they meet them. Like okay, I play a lot of video games, right?
Sure.
Like I've played games with like people who literally do not leave their house ever, and it's very obvious that they don't really ever talk to other people because of certain stances that they take on things and how they react to certain conversational points. So like for me, I feel like eliminating the social interaction between you, your classmates, and your teachers is not a very good idea. Because also, I know for a fact that if I like a teacher more, I'm probably going to work harder.
Gotcha.
Like I'm not gonna lie. Like I play favorites. I had favorite teachers. Like I had favorite teachers. Like I would work harder for a teacher that I liked and I felt genuinely cared about me than like the teacher who's like, I'm just here for like I'm just here for a check, because I feel like they don't really care, so why should I care?
Yeah, so the motivation was for an experience that wasn't so transactional, right? Like they knew you knew them, and yeah, I think that's a super important thing to highlight, right? There's so much more going on there in that interaction than just the transactional, like I give you work and you give it back, right? And but what about you, JB? I know that you all, like the Lighthouse has had to pivot, right, to a virtual model, at least for some part of the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, and Tyree raises some good points. I mean, it's made me reflect on, that notion of space. And, I mean, he said it best in terms of, how it affects different people based on, the circumstances in your household. And, houses are always places for learning. So it's not that people aren't learning in their houses. It's just, is your house conducive to sort of other type, the sort of school, what we associate with sort of school day learning? Is your house a good place for that? And some people might be yes, it might be no, but we've sort of lost that sort of playing field of everybody sort of going to a school of some sort. And I think in general, if you think about sort of, I'm most interested in comprehensive learning, not school day learning. And so in general, I think of the more spaces where you can sort of point to and say, this is a place I go to learn, the better. And I think that's what's so challenging about this moment, is not that we're using more virtual for learning, because we can talk about a few of the promises of it too, but that it's become sort of one of the only spaces for learning. And that's what's, I think, dangerous and frustrating, and why people are getting burned out, is because, you're not spending that much time at the library, your after school program, your school, your cousin's house, et cetera, all the places where you have both social interaction and learning going on. And so that's what feels like what you can't overcome that one. We can sort of put all the best practices of youth development into a virtual space. And I think that's what's become most important, is that, when you've got an after school program or an out of school time program, and you've developed a sense of trust and you've done these work, the amount of best practices that you need to embed in your program are up for debate, because you know you've got things going on and kids vote with their feet and they come to your program, so you know that what you're doing has meaning to them. But in a virtual space, it feels really critical to sort of not load in, but to make sure you're sort of covering all of the work around, agreements and check-ins and people's mental health and sort of how they're feeling, and like making sure everyone has a voice that's in that sort of virtual classroom. All those things just feel so much more critical and urgent, because you're trying to sort of forge a social connection and a human connection beyond just content and that kind of learning. This is nothing about this moment feels, content learning does not feel important right now. It feels like learning through our shared experience, and how are you surviving and thriving in this moment feels more important and more inspirational than sort of like, how much did you remember from the reading last night,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like how can we check in on each other as humans first, right?
And that's part of the promise, right? Is that we're using these types of platforms so much that space and time has gotten crunched a little even further, and now some of the virtual programs, when we prioritized our physical space, we're now able to engage kids who we've got a photo essay class right now, and it's for 18 to 24-year-olds, and it's for Pittsburgh, it's for the Pittsburgh region, but we've actually got some young people who are born and raised in Pittsburgh but going to college elsewhere as part of our cohort, something we hadn't really would have never thought about in a physical space, but now they're able to participate in that way. And so that's an opportunity and something that the virtual platform has brought to us.
That's interesting. So it in some ways dramatically expands who can participate, right? But you had said something about, and you and I have had this conversation before too, to be transparent, about one of the pitfalls is kind of, for the new student, creating trust, right? And, having been able to spend some time at the Lighthouse, the culture and the feel in there is distinct, right? It's a welcoming, loving place where students are welcome to exercise their agency. And to me, that is cultivated through that face-to-face relationship, right? So it's like, there's a design question of how do we bring new people into this co-created virtual space so they can still feel that same effect of walking into the Lighthouse, but at the same time, this ability to dramatically expand the footprint and push the students' work out farther and to kind of widen that web of who's participating is really, really interesting. Do you think that's something that you all might continue even in a post-COVID future, of looking at ways to use like digital mediums to encourage mass participation?
I think it's something we're gonna, certainly, we're in that headspace now, and so I think we're continuing to learn. I think we feel like we're in a space that a lot of other youth serving organizations are in, and trying to learn from each other. So I see that it'll be a slice of our work moving forward. I think we've quite frankly we've got a space that we've got to program and utilize once as things sort of shift back to some sort of form of normal. And so I think right now we just feel anxious to sort of get back to that place where we can be in physical, be together physically. And I think that's really the magic of what our program is, and assumably a lot of programs is building a sense of community that you can take into the virtual world. But it's hard to build those, like you said, build those levels of, trust and deep camaraderie through sort of highly mediated and scheduled interactions. I mean, that's the other thing about the virtual space, is you got to both be in the same virtual space at the same time, as opposed to, hey, let's just meet at the Lighthouse, or let's go, like so many spaces, like, you go into the library and all of a sudden you see some people, you happen to bump into that. You don't bump into people in the virtual space, not usually. And so I think that's where we feel like there's limitations on what's possible. And, we really want to get back to our sort of bread and butter.
For sure.
Touching more on the whole interaction thing, like I'm a very different person now than when I started going to Lighthouse. And I can say without a doubt that if this would have happened at the same time that I joined Lighthouse, I would not be who I am today. Like I'm not even going to say not a social person. I don't share a lot about myself personally, like just like feelings, but like I'll sit and talk to you for hours, but you'll know nothing about me though. But now after going through like the digital portion of what Lighthouse did, while yes, I did have fun, it felt more like a task than it did when I would just go to the Y and see the exact same people talk about the exact same things, but like having a fun conversation on like camera isn't the same as like having a fun conversation in person. Because if I make a joke and you laugh like on a camera, I'm like, okay, that's cool. But if you laugh and like you jump up and like you walk around, like, see, there's a certain air to it. Like, so I feel like for people moving into it new and not really knowing it, it kind of discourages activity almost. Like, you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, think about hanging out with you at the Lighthouse and talking about video games and anime and gaming. We could do that through here, right? But we're relying on that experience, right, to make the virtual interaction, I don't want to say more meaningful, but it colors it a little bit differently, right? Whereas if we just jumped in here and we're trying to get to know each other, different strategies, right? It's a different lift. So the other question I've been dying to ask you both, and this segues really nicely to talking about sort of promises and pitfalls of virtual learning and sort of the Lighthouse culture. And JB, like one of the ways I often describe what happens at the Lighthouse is that it's inherently student-centered or learner-centered or youth-centered, right? And you'll have to forgive me for the gross generalization, but I feel that sort of kind of captures the spirit for which you interact with the learners there. So kind of extending out this idea of what youth-centered might mean, now in a virtual environment, but more importantly, out into the future, what might youth-centered learning or a youth-centered future look like kind of in light of global events that we're all experiencing right now? Does it actually change the philosophy at all?
For me, it feels like it's just a double down of the philosophy that's sort of been emerging over the trends that have been sort of coming out around, youth voice and youth-centered learning and, sort of real world engagement, and that, young people really want to experience real world scenarios and sort of feel like the projects, the activities, the things that they do actually reverberate in society. They're not mock. They're not sort of, abstract. And so I think it feels like, this feels like a moment where we need to reflect on the fact that, if young people are impacted by the real world and are impacted by the choices and preparation or lack of preparation for the things that happen in the world, then we should be doubling down on empowering them for sort of acting in the world. And so that's, to me, sort of what I would love to see learning being more of, is like, sort of content memorization or sort of those types of things should really be secondary to sort of experiential learning. And right now we think of experiential learning as like the enrichment to the school day or to the sort of subject-based stuff. And I think it really should be flipped around. Experiential learning, you know, that's how you learn. That's learning by doing. That's what you hear adults say over and over and over again. I learn the best by doing. And I don't know why we haven't doubled down on that. Just that philosophy alone needs to be more invested in. Yeah,
for sure. Or even just workplace learning in general, right? You're going to pretty much have to figure it out yourself.
Right.
So, Tyree, what about you? You know, how do you think this idea of a youth-centered future might shift? Will it shift?
I feel like it will shift, but I'm curious in which way. Because I am only 20 years old. Like, I'm not that old, so like I do still make really dumb decisions like all the time. So I'm very curious on if it's a fully led by the youth instance. Which way will it lean, and how much good or how much harm could it cause? Because like I've been in like youth-led conversations before, and I've been in good ones, I've been in bad ones. So I'm very curious to see how that would work, both with some adult help and both with no adult help.
Yeah, I think it's a mix too. Right. And I think that that's wise to make that distinction. Right. And I think that from my point of view, like a youth-centered doesn't always mean youth-dominated, but it means rearranging the pieces of a system that kind of encapsulates a learner of any age. Right. So, you know, when we're talking about things like, I don't know, needs, interests, and goals, it allows the flexibility and a framework to say, this is where you want to go. This is what you're interested in. And it gives us the ability to get really serious about meeting your needs on the way to getting to that goal, right? And that we can flux and flex. So that might mean in you know, a totally youth-driven conversation. It might mean an adult moderator in that instance, right? But it's all centered around kind of the needs, interests, and goals of that young person, of that learner, of that student, right? Instead of just going, here's the system, we're going to plug you into it, succeed in spite of it, succeed because of it, but it's go ahead, you're on your own. And the behaviors of that system maybe don't always have a young person's best interests in mind. So the final question, because I realize this can be a big one and I want to see where this can go. And JB, you started to kind of hint at it a little bit with experiential learning. And this is a big question too. But if you were to wave a magic wand, right, and to bring your own aspirational or preferred future to light for learning, what is it? What might it be? And this could be anything from a classroom interaction to like how the system might behave. But what is your vision for the future of learning?
Yeah, it's a big one.
It's the big one.
Go ahead, Tyree.
Using student interest to reinforce learning, because like me personally, while I was still in like high school, I knew a lot of like underclassmen that like really liked anime and really liked comic books. So, and if we take like the writing of certain characters and use them in a certain light, it could be used as a learning tool and also a way to inspire kids to write more about what it is. Because like I remember reading like the allegory of the cave in 12th grade. I could not care any less about what that book was about that entire time. Did I do the work? Kind of, but that's not the point of this. But what I'm saying is, if you can take a character or something that I'm already interested in, and show me the undertones of said character, that could probably inspire me more to want to write and want to read about this character in this light. Because every like super big character from a movie or like comic book or like whatever has undertones. Just like because I love Batman, right? It's like I love Batman. But if we break down who Batman is and what he does, the main source of it is him addressing his own trauma. So if we can find a way to use these characters that like kids draw such a strong connection to, you could probably get them to work harder and also learn more about who that child is while teaching them.
That's fascinating. So one, I want to honor your capacity and your interest for nuance. It's amazing. Because when you're like, I want to get at these undertones, I want to see what's underneath the surface. It's not all one way or the other.
Oh, yeah, because like
it's awesome.
As a kid, I'm just like, Batman's cool, but like now I'm just like, wait a minute. So Batman does this and this and this. He did all this training, all this detective work, all this, and it all leads back to that one night. Like everyone knows Batman's origin story. Like anyone who's like seen a Batman movie or read a comic, played a game, you know what his origin is. But do you stop and think about how that origin caused him to become the hero that he is? Like,
that's cool.
Every hero's backstory has something in it that is the main driving force behind it. Just like Superman, just like his entire thing was, I know I'm the strongest thing on this planet, but how can I protect this planet? What was the driving force that made him like, how can I protect this planet and not how can I conquer this planet? Because it wouldn't be hard.
So that's really cool. Like, so you're kind of going back to that student-centered piece where if I'm hearing you right, your vision's predicated on interest, but also it's predicated on relevance, right?
Yeah.
Of saying like, these are the things that are relevant to you that can act as a way to open the door to asking deeper questions. Like, what's going on under the hood of this person? Yeah. What's, the nuance? That's awesome, Tyree.
Well, if you are interested in something, you care a lot more about it. Like, I can sit here and ramble about comics and video games all day long because that's what I care about. That's what I'm interested in. But if you ask me to like talk about what I learned in like 12th grade, all I'm gonna say is mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Because like while it's just information that I'm just recycling. It's not something that I think about. It's not something that I truly care about. But like as like just like these, like every like the majority of kids, young adults, and everything, like they watch movies, they watch TV shows, they play games, like they read books. If you take these characters and break these characters down, you can probably find a way to teach these kids a lot better. Because the number of times that I've been in class and he's talking about some random historical figure who was important to history, I'm just kind of like, okay, I'm gonna take my notes now. Not, so like this means this and this means this. That's cool. I mean, there are some historical figures that are like that do interest me that much, but it's not the same as the interest that gets inspired from these characters that I feel like I know about, that I know these characters. And if you can teach me something new about a character that I think that I know 100% about, you're getting my full attention the whole way through, and I'm asking questions. So I just feel like interest, like you need to find what these kids like, or at least what like the main group of kids like, because there's always going to be outliers. So you need to find like the main group of whatever these kids are into and address it in that way. Because cool. if not, there's always gonna be them kids like me, because like I'm a smart guy, but through like towards my senior year, I'm just trying to pass. Like,
and I think that with what I'm hearing too, you would maybe redefine what academic success looks a little bit, right? Because if somebody
the way they do academics, it says, oh, you can recycle all this information perfectly, but your problem solving skills in like actual life are freaking terrible. So like I'm not the world's best student. I wasn't the world's worst student. But if you give me a literal problem that I can solve with my hands, I guarantee that I can do it. Maybe not as fast as you want me to do it, but I can solve that problem.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say that knowing you're an intelligent, articulate, hard worker, right? But when you kind of have that pigeonhole of academic success, it's going to constrain who you are and bringing your authentic self to that academic.
I was an average student. I was an average student, not because I couldn't do better. It was just that I didn't. The way that they measured how well you were doing wasn't good for people like me.
Mm-hmm.
And people like, I don't know how JB did in school, but people like JB, we are creative people. We learn in creative ways. If you give us some form of creative outlet, I can like, we're gonna do good. Like I remember, like I am a rapper. We were doing a project on this poem, or I forget the name of the poem, but we were supposed to rewrite the story in a different fashion. I wrote it as a rap. And I banged it out, before the class was before class was even over. I didn't even have to do it. I already did the writing portion that I had to do. It was just something else that was extra points that I knew I could do because this is what I do. So I did it. Like
because it was relevant.
Creative people don't learn by sitting there and staring at you do it. That's not how we learn. That's not how we work. We're not hardwired for it.
100% agree.
Yep. In terms of interest-driven learning, I don't think there's anything I could say better than Tyree just did, and I think that's what we have tried to do at Lighthouse quite a bit.
Oh, you're good at it.
Is follow you guys' interest. I mean, and there's probably a period where we it was a pivot that we had to make in terms of embracing things like anime and Afrofuturism and the different strands of what you guys were all interested in, and then building curriculum around it. And I think that's where if you're talking about values and those types of things, you can sort of build it into anything.
Sure. Like, you guys sat me down and said, let's make a world. And I was already sold. I didn't even know what world we were making. It was just like, let's make a world, and we will build this world from the ground up. And I was 100% sold. I was there every day. I was ready because you guys did a wonderful job. Like, you knew what the majority of your kids liked, and you played to it, and you got us to, and you got a lot of activity from the kids who really cared. Like, more learning programs or schools need to figure out how to teach your students, not just the kids who are like, give me my project, I'll do it. Like, not everyone's like that.
Well, it raises questions around not just interests of students and young people, but interests of adults. Mm-hmm. And so we're blessed to have teaching artists who have these similar types of interests. And it sort of speaks to, it's important to have a point of view and have to bring your own interests, your own point of view, your own self to your work as an educator or, a teacher, because that's partly what inspires passion. I mean, kids have their own interests, but when young people see that we're super pumped about something, or that we come from a certain type of, culture, or whatever it is, that's part of it too. That's what makes the experience more authentic. And I think it makes the sort of mentorship aspect of learning sort of more important. And I'm the first one to sort of, bow to anyone who claims themselves to be a teacher. So I'm not making a comparison there, but I think that the part of a teacher where teachers embrace that sort of aspect of being mentors, right? Where if you think about what it means to be a mentor versus a teacher, I think that's the part we need to sort of think more about. I think another thing in terms of the transformation of learning that we've been thinking about a lot at Lighthouse is like, you know, thinking about this moment and, you know, how much the lens is on, you know, structural racism, systemic racism, and how as a country we're reflecting on how paralyzing that is for certain parts of our, you know, for Black folks in particular, people of color in particular. You know, where are the deficits in learning? And trying to really break the mold on this notion that, you know, it's young people of color who have they do have a deficit because they're the most most marginalized. But in terms of what's necessary to create change, we also have to look at the deficits of, you know, the dominant class and young white kids, and what ingredients need to be in their learning so that we can undo systemic racism. And I think that's a bigger conversation because we're still focused on sort of we think we've moved past the deficit model in terms of, you know, focusing on inner cities and you know, communities of color. And I don't want people to misunderstand what I mean here, that we should not be creating amazing world-class experiences for young people, you know, in the hood. But I think it sort of raises like, what are the missing ingredients for folks? If we're going to create an equitable society, a society where everybody can learn, there's work that has to be done in the educational pathways for, you know, the suburbs and white communities as well. Yeah.
We need people who understand where we're coming from. Because like the majority of teachers that I have were good teachers. They were good teachers, but they were all white, the majority of them. Which I'm not knocking you. Like, it's just not some of you don't understand where a lot of us come from. Like, personally, I haven't had to struggle for that much. Like, but still, I am a African American male with dreads who looks kind of angry most of the time. Like, I kind of always look like I'm not happy. And like just those three things, excuse me, I'm getting excited. Alone already puts a target on my mouth, puts a target on me. Like, I've been followed in stores. I've been asked, "What you doing here?" before. Like I've been in situations I shouldn't have been in, but like a lot of teachers don't understand. Like I happen to articulate myself very well about like what I've been through and like other circumstances, but not everyone talks about what they've been through or what trauma they have. Because like while I haven't been through like too many trials and tribulations, I'm still an African American. I still see what's going on. I still know what the problem is. But for everyone who has had a lot, who has had it a lot harder than I have, and who do less reputable things because that's how they see themselves. Like a lot of, I'm not gonna say a lot, some of us don't see a different pathway out of it. It's like funny to say, because I am a rapper, a lot of us feel like it's music or sports. A lot of feel like it's music, sports, girls, like makeup, for like just like stuff like that, right? Which there's nothing wrong with that. If that is your passion, go for it. Like I'm a firm believer in chasing your passion. But I feel like we need people to explain to us that we're more than shooting hoops. We're more than writing words. Like we are more than hair salons and like nail technicians. Like there's nothing wrong with being those. There's nothing wrong with pursuing that. But it never hurts to just tell a kid, hey, like carpentry is a thing. Like you can do it. Like you can go to college. Like you can do this, you can do that. And I just feel like I personally got talked to like I personally did get like that talk a lot, but that's just because like my aunts and stuff went to college. So they told me this and like everything. But that's not everyone's family though. That's not everyone's circumstances. Because like I went to school with a lot of people that I knew for a fact was doing stuff that they shouldn't have been doing. But a lot of them do it because that's what they think they have to do to survive. And some people, they really do have to do that to survive, because you never know. Like, I've gone to school with dudes that I might never ever see again, because no one stopped and really tried to convince them that if you can do this and that and sell this, you can start a business.
Well, Tyree, it makes me think, like, you know, if we're dreaming about futures, it makes me dream about opportunity being abundant, right? Because when opportunity is abundant, people don't, this decision making is so different, you know, and that's what I'm talking about. Is like, there are places in our country where opportunity is abundant, and people don't have to think about sort of really risky or detrimental career choices, because there's just too many attractive options that are like, this looks wonderful. And I think that's what we have to sort of figure out, is like, how do we make opportunity abundant in our communities, where it's just like, this is obvious. Like, as long as I continue to do the right things, hang out with the right people, my path, you know, I've got options of pathways sort of there for me.
Yeah. More people like Lighthouse and more people like you, JB.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, you guys have given me a lot of opportunities that I would not have had just randomly, just because you knew I needed something. Like, just because you had my contact information. Like, it's like,
that's how the world works everywhere. I mean, that's how, you know, I mean, it's I mean, talking about learning, you know, it's like, it's also who you know, and not necessarily always what you know. I think, you know, the more mentors people have in their lives, the more people they're connected to, the more spaces they're connected to. And so this is all part of what we're talking about, is like, you know, I mean, I appreciate the compliments, and our thing is like, how do we just make that all more available to everybody?
I don't even know, honestly. I don't even have a first clue.
It's by starting conversations like this, right? And airing it out, and then, you know, putting intention behind those words. But so we are down to our last 2 minutes, guys. One, I want to thank you both. This has been a fantastic conversation to be part of. As we look to end the broadcast, can you tell our listeners where they could get a hold of you? Website, email, SoundCloud account, Tyree? Not to put you on the spot, but I've heard it and it's fantastic.
It's just, I haven't had much drive to write anything in like the last few months, and it's just,
but you do have some great material out, so let's.
I do. Yeah, I do. It's just, I keep trying to write, and it's just, there's nothing there right now, and it's annoying.
Hey, when it feels like the world's falling apart, sometimes it's tough to tap into that well.
Yeah, like every artist is a different, like some people lock in by themselves, bang out a whole album. I'm not one of those people. I can't do that. I need to interact with like other artists, other people. Like I feed off their energy, and it gives me drive to write more. Every artist is a different, but the SoundCloud is Lucid, LUCID.
Cool, thank you.
Here we go. For me, at Armstead Brown, I use my middle name for most of my social media handles. So Armstead Brown would get you to most of my social media. And I do have a SoundCloud page as well if you want to check out my music. And then most certainly stop by and say hi to our YMCA Lighthouse pages, which is all YMCA Lighthouse on all social media platforms. Yeah, there it is.
Awesome. So thank you both for your time and your insights, and stay tuned next Thursday for the latest episode of Tomorrow. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jason.
Yep.